Hey everyone, it's Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. Today I kind of want to talk about something that I've started seeing a lot of people talking about basically, and that is the perspective that YA contemporary books have and how they are kind of frowned upon and they're kind of inferior to any sort of fantasy or sci-fi or dystopian, basically any story that is not set in our actual world. For some reason, YA contemporary has gotten this rep that it is like light and fluffy and it's just about high school and prom and dating and boys and it's nothing more. While that's a valid case for YA when it first kind of came on the scene, those were the YA contemporary books that I remember seeing when I was like a very young teenager. Everything was very like preppy and prom oriented. And that is just not the case anymore. As the years have progressed, we've seen a lot more dark and serious concepts being brought into the whole contemporary thing, which is, I feel like, something that people need to realize and not frown upon. YA contemporaries are starting to be more and more about just kind of empowerment. They're starting to see a lot of feminist themes running through them, which I can really appreciate. While I'm not saying that's what all of YA contemporary is, yes, there is still the fluff, there is still the romance, there is also tons of LGBTQ books coming out, there are tons of guy-oriented books coming out. I mainly just want to focus on pretty much the girl empowerment movement that's happening in YA contemporary and the recent books that I've read that have kind of pushed me to want to talk about it. So here we go. So the past 4 books that I have read recently are very different stories and they were not picked up for this concept at all. They just happened to be what I wanted to read at that point in time. And they're very vast, but they all fall into the YA contemporary range. So the first book that I want to talk about is Exit Pursued by a Bear, and this is by E.K. Johnston. And this is a book that is starting to get a ton of hype right now because it was just released this month. This book is a book that I never ever would have picked up based on the cover just because it looks like the YA contemporary cover. It's about cheerleading, which is not something that I am honestly remotely interested in. But after reading the synopsis, it sounded kind of appealing, so I wanted to give it a try. This book is nothing like I expected it to be. This book deals with the concept of rape, and it does not sugarcoat anything, and this is a type of book that I feel like teenage girls need to be seeing more of. It does not victimize the girl, it does not portray her as being weak. This is actually one of the most empowering books I have ever read as a young female. It's about a girl who goes to cheerleading camp and essentially gets date raped and doesn't remember any of the occurrence and is just following her life after the fact and trying to get back into a normal teenage life without this stigma following her around. And she is the strongest character. She pretty much chooses to not be the victim. She doesn't want people pitying her. She specifically asks the town minister to stop asking people to pray for her because that's kind of feeding the victimization of her, and she just wants to be seen as a normal person, not as the girl who was raped. And I feel like this is the bluntest example of what needs to be said. It does not sugarcoat things. It's not explicit. There's no seriously graphic scenes, but it definitely sheds light on a situation that is very possible and very realistic. And this is the only case I've ever seen in the aftermath of such a horrific attack on a person where they don't let it define them. They don't let it bring them down. And I just loved this book thoroughly. I'm going to read everything by this author at this point, and I highly recommend this book as just kind of a little pick-me-up as far as female empowerment goes. The next book that I read is going to fall more into what I consider to be YA contemporary from my teenage years, mainly because of the author, but that is Saint Anything by Sarah Dessen. Sarah Dessen has been around forever and has pretty much dominated the YA contemporary genre. This being said, her books are very light and enjoyable, and they're very heartwarming, and they're very humbling stories, because I feel like her writing encompasses all aspects of young teenage girls' lives. It encompasses their friendships, their families, any romantic interests, but it balances it equally. I feel like a lot of YA contemporary starts that way, and then it obviously just focuses on the romance because that's what a lot of people want to read about. Sarah Dessen does not do that. She gives you a wholesome experience, And this book is one of her darker books. She has a couple out there that are definitely on a darker topic, but this one is about a girl who has always lived in the shadow of her brother and is continuing to do so after he got into a drunk driving accident and severely injured a kid. And this is following her around as being the sister of this boy. The entire story is basically her learning how to make friends on her own and learning how to come into her own without the stigma of this amazing brother who has very quickly been brought down but still way more talked about than she ever will be. And it just kind of shows that you don't have to let your family's past and family's present define who you are going to be. And it was a very eye-opening experience to read something like that, where it's mostly friendship driven and it's mostly character growth. I just thought it was very refreshing, and I'm going to highly recommend this book for anybody who's looking for a lighter read but still get a lot out of it as far as feministic views and kind of growing up as a teenage girl. The next book that I got to is Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson, and this is a story about a girl who wakes up one morning and her best friend has pretty much just disappeared, has left no trace as to where she went, what's going on, and she can't get in touch with her. And this is one of those friends where you just kind of follow in their footsteps. This girl is very outgoing and very much extroverted. Meanwhile, our narrator is obviously extremely shy, extremely introverted, and doesn't know how to traverse life without her friend. It was a very warm and fluffy tale. This is going to fall way more into the cliche YA contemporary just because it's kind of a feel-good, happy ending type story, but it definitely shows how one person can go from being the shy girl and coming into her own and coming into trying to figure out who she wants to be as a person and not letting somebody else define who she is going to be and what friends she should make. So it was just a really interesting experience, and it's definitely not romance driven, and it's very empowering to read. This is the key word we're talking about, empowerment here. And the last book that I want to talk about is going to take a serious turn from light and fluffy, but that is The Sacred Lies of Minnow, Blythe, and this is by Stephanie Oakes, and I just finished this today, which is part of the reason why I want to make this video, because I mainly want to gush about this book. This book was unlike anything I've ever read, and I'm going to highly recommend it to everybody. This book is about four things. It's about a girl who escaped a fanatical cult that was in the woods. It's about a girl who escaped that cult after they cut off her hands. It's about a girl who is found after brutally beating a boy under a bridge, and it's about her experience in a juvenile detention center while she's being tried, basically, about the beating and about the potential murder of the prophet and the destruction of this cult. So obviously this book is way darker than normal YA contemporary, but I'm gonna still include it in contemporary because there were no fantastical or magical elements in it. But this book was so impactful. It was one of those books that just kind of makes you sit back and go, fuck. It's one of those books that I had to kind of stop occasionally while I was reading it and just kind of like take a breather because it's really intense, it's really graphic. But the all-around theme of this is the concept of regaining control and regaining power over your life. And this is obviously an extreme example of that, of a girl who is brought up under this fanatical religious faith that she can never be questioned, where women's only role in life is to basically bear the children of God, and that is your only purpose, to be there. And obviously she has a very far way to come from that mentality to modern day feminist mentality, but it was just very harrowing and very fascinating to follow her story while she's learning how to accept life outside of that cult and embrace what happened to her, and that it was not her fault, and that any death or any brutality that happened is not her fault. This book deals with a lot more than just that. There's a lot of morality, there's a lot of ethics, there's a lot of faith and religion and life and death. It's one of those books that makes you think a lot. But what I took away from it the most was the concept of female empowerment, which is obviously what this video is about. But all four of these books came into my life recently, and all four of them have had a very strong message of coming into your own and learning how to control your life. And I really like this turn that YA seems to be taking. it's getting a lot darker and it's getting a lot more serious and relevant to actual issues that can happen. And these are all things that need to be brought to light, and I just like that a lot of YA that's coming out right now is dealing with a lot heavier issues and embracing them in many different ways, but it's kind of teaching girls different ways to perceive themselves and how to come into their own identity and have power over their own lives. So if you guys have read any books that have really stuck out to you as far as girl power, basically, let me know, because I'm apparently on a kick right now for that, and I am looking for something new. So if you guys have any books that you can recommend, please leave them in the comments. So that's going to be it for my rant on amazing female empowerment books. I hope you guys are having an amazing night, and I hope you're reading some amazing books, and I will see you guys next time.